I know we've looked at this a little bit, and we watched part of this presentation, I think, but I had no idea exactly what was going on because we only started right here. But this is kind of wild. So apparently,
as you can see, I'm not.
This was a presentation on the file system. This is what I'm kind of gathering for the Linux. Dude, the fact that the Linux Foundation posted this is crazy.
Kent.
And so,
but I'm the one who is actually sending the patches for the file system abstractions. So we decided I'd show you guys a few slides and then we jump into discussions. Kent also has a list of things in addition to what I'm going to show here. I'm going to try to be.
Sorry, my inner monologue just got so excited about this. Louder? Yeah, my bad. I didn't have it louder. But I did watch a little bit of this. We watched up here, and we'll jump up here. But apparently, he only got through 3 slides, is what people have said, and then could not get further because people were so staunch on what was happening, which is just kind of a whoopsies.
I love you.
My bad. Left the alerts on. Get wrecked. I just had no idea it was this bad. I guess I just didn't really understand. Rust, always drama around this cult. This one I actually think is potentially C devs issues. This might actually be a C dev issue.
To be brief so we can spend most of the time on the discussions, okay? So a quick status on where things are. For those who may not be following this, I sent an RFC patch series sometime last year. And there's some links here. And,
we're going to see how long it takes for him to get interrupted.
For things to change, and I made those changes back in January, and I just posted them on Zulip. I didn't actually send them to the mailing list, but I did it this morning. I was planning to send them earlier, but I decided to wait until the morning after a few beers last night.
It's a good move. Good move. By the way, he just gave you a very great piece of wisdom. Never communicate after a few beers, okay? Turn the emails off.
A little bit of the goals of the abstractions, why we're doing this work of building these abstractions in Rust. Basically, in Rust, we have the ability to express more of the intent of the code or the requirements that the code have in the type system. And this allows us to catch more bugs at compile time. And I'll show you quickly a couple of quick examples afterwards. It also allows us to automate some tasks that are not...
I like that we have the pre-knowledge of what's about to happen, and he's just like, I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples afterwards. No idea what's about to happen. Just none. Just not even ready at all for what's about to happen. What time did I wake up? 6 a.m. on the dot.
Very easily automatable in C, and I'll show you a small example later too. And the result of these two things is that we have a more productive developer experience when we are writing file systems in Rust or code in general. You want to add something, Ken?
You got to be careful. See how he's yapping? See what he just did there? When you tell C devs who are used to doing everything themselves that you'll have a more enjoyable coding experience in a different language, oh, you just yapping to them, okay? These guys have been writing C longer than I've been alive. That's yap. This is yapping at that point.
Oh. Yeah, so as I said before, we get more bugs caught at compile time. We spend less time debugging these issues. So when I talk about developer experience, I'm not just talking about the time you sit down and you spend writing the code. I'm actually talking about the time afterwards when you try to deploy the code and there are issues and you have to investigate those perhaps in production. So you save a lot of time by catching those bugs earlier.
I thought he was saying that Rust had production bugs. We all know that the number one reason why people use Rust is that you write bug-free code, right? Because that would be really, really confusing if that wasn't the case. I mean, Rust in shambles at that point. The amazing part of this whole exchange is the realization that apparently nobody really knows the FS interface. There's one guy that knows it, and it's all in his head, and the day he dies, there will be something like 6 months to 14 years of no improvements on the file system. And that's that.
And of course, we also have fewer memory-related vulnerabilities because of the undefined behavior guarantees that Rust offers, and those sort of eliminate, modulo some bugs in the compiler and abstractions. It eliminates memory safety issues.
In my career, I've seen a lot of massive 2 weeks, all hands on deck bug hunts, and we all have. Those kinds of bug hunts suck, and I've been doing a lot of work in Bcache FS to try to eliminate those and come up with better assertions and so on. Rust does a lot more than anything I could do. The two main threads that I've been pushing on, and I'm going to be talking more about in the Bcache of SBOF, are undefined behavior, eliminating undefined behavior, and also better reflection. You can't debug if you can't see you can't debug if you can't see what's going on. Rust has some really nice provisions with that are kind of secondary but very useful. And lifting us, we don't talk enough about assertions in the kernel because reasons, but the end goal, like what I see.
Why don't they do assertions? I know the man's so he's disappointed and he's trying to. You can see that's called an inner monologue, people. That inner monologue's yapping, going, "Don't say it. You're about to say something. The moment you say this, you know what's gonna happen." Like, see, he knows what's about to happen here.
In a couple decades out, kernel development is going to be getting a whole lot easier over the coming decades. The end goal that I want to see is a programming experience where we've got a language where we can practically do embedded correctness proofs, where we know when we write the code that the code is correct, so that when I finish a project and move on to the next thing, I know that I'm not going to get yanked back to that previous project debugging things. That's not fun. It's not productive getting yanked off to the code that should have been done months ago.
By the way, Rust cannot guarantee that. Rust can guarantee you things about memory that are correct. It can guarantee you various stuff, but it does not guarantee that you've written a correct program. And this is one of those things that people keep getting incorrect when they talk about Rust, which is there is no replacement for human stupidity. And this includes LLMs, because LLMs are written from human stupidity. So at best, they're 95% accurate humans. Okay? So it just doesn't exist, okay? We are permanently in a bad spot. You will always be pulled back because you are not perfect. But Rust can eliminate a whole bunch of stuff. And one thing I think that they're asking for, which I don't know if we'll get to, I just wanted to see where the first interruption happens and try to understand how this all happened. I think Rust has a lot of benefit because it will finally put really concrete types on some of the development, which I think would help a lot of people because it sounds like nobody knows what the FS system, how it works. And so better types do encode semantics about what's happening, which is nice. But at the same time, is the bet that you can encode all the semantics into a type system's good? And so there's kind of like this double trade-off there that's a little bit interesting.
Assertions are what we're stuck with in C, but Rust can actually prove not just the simple stuff that you think with references, but you can prove a lot of code correctness issues just with what Rust gives you, and we'll be talking more about that.
Thanks, Kent. A simple example here of the expressiveness of the type system. Okay, so this is I get locked. It's a simple example. Okay, but it's just to illustrate how much easier Rust makes using this function. Right. So as most of you probably already know, when you call this function, you have to check, of course, if the function failed and return null. In that case, you return failure, perhaps. But if it's non-null, then there are a few things you have to do. You have to look at a field, the iState field, to see if it's a new inode or if it's some existing one, right? Because here you're trying to get it if it exists or create one if it doesn't exist, right?
Okay, that makes
and then
sense.
if it is new, then you have to initialize it and you have to remember to call unlock new inode.
Yeah. The key word that makes all this possible is algebraic data types.
That's exactly what I thought this was going in my head, is that they're kind of setting up all the state that you have to do, and then they're going to try to move those type of checks, the if I knew versus I state, or check I knew if it's on I state. They're moving that into the type system so you can do a match and then do the behavior on top of all of this such that it works out. I think that's what they're effectively saying, right? But we got hit with the word algebraic data types. You know, you should probably take a step back and just be like, look at how easy this looks. The one interrupting, yeah, a long-haired guy. Long-haired guys, obviously these two are both very pro-Rust. And I'm neither, I think Zig would be a great choice. I feel like if they would have just chosen with Zig, they probably would have gotten away with a lot more. Just throwing that out there.
is
He's part of the
just now
presentation.
trying to get algebraic data types, and they won't be ergonomic ever because it's C++. Rust has really amazing algebraic data types and error handling.
Yeah.
But then, yep. Go ahead, Al.
Okay, so we did get to slide 2 before the interruption start. 5 minutes into the presentation of these two, and he did the one thing you're not supposed to do, which is talk about algebraic data types, okay? It's like you don't drop algebraic data types. You show algebraic data types and go, look at how easy it is to match on behavior. And then people feel like they get it. But if you just start hitting them with these words, people are like, I ain't got time for this shit. And then it just starts exploding every single time. Anyways, Zig moves too fast for the kernel. I agree. Zig ultimately is not ready to be put into the kernel. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Once Zig gets into a place where it will not break again, then Zig would actually be a compelling option because Zig perfectly integrates with C. You can just like bring it in. That's it. Right? Like, I mean, and so it is a very great language to intermingle with C, but it's not there yet. I totally am on your team. And by the way, this is good teaching advice. When you're talking to somebody and you're introducing a new concept, you should never use the technical terms if you can. The technical terms are often a distraction, right? They're a distraction where people end up arguing about all this extra stuff that don't need to happen. Instead, you're just like, look at this. I can express, if this thing's null, I can express it with the type system and show that you have to check for null. I force you to check for null if the thing is null. And that makes life really, really, really nice. Zig is not garbage collection. You have to specify every single allocation when it comes to Zig. All right. So okay. So this is how the presentation went. Let's hear this first argument kind of to understand what's happening. So we haven't even, by the way, he hasn't said anything other than saying that there's a better way. The better way is called algebraic data types. It has better error handling, which, by the way, it does. For anyone that thinks that result object isn't, I think result is probably like the quote-unquote best single way you can do error handling.
A bit of correction. It is ref counted from the very beginning.
I'm sorry? Say that
It
again?
is ref counted from the very beginning.
Sorry.
inode is ref if I get locked returns non-null.
Yeah.
The result is ref counted.
Is ref counted? Yes. Did I say it is?
I get failed expect the holder of the soul reference to pass it to it, and it drops that reference.
You
don't expect the owner to do what?
As it even says right there, the inode is ref counted and can be used / returned. It says inode must be returned with ref counted data structure, right? This guy imitates Russian better than you. He does. Russian accent confirmed. Man, this would have been such a frustrating presentation to go through. Imagine having a presentation where you're trying to show something, right? And this was the goal of this slide, is just simply to say, here's the interface that we have today. And this is why the next interface is actually much easier. Let's see, how long does it take to actually get to the next interface? Here would be the next interface, which is going to return to you. And now this is, I mean, obviously upon first glance, this is pretty ugly, but there's reference counting. It's a result. So you have the error encoded into it, you have an either, and you have reference counting all kind of built into it, which is pretty nice to have the exact semantics of what is happening encoded in the type system, despite it being ugly. I know a lot of people are saying it's ugly. It is not that readable. I agree. Even though you're saying this is readable, no, it's because you're familiar. But I generally can kind of guess what is trying to happen here, right? I can generally guess that, okay, I know there's an error. I know it's one of these. I know it's reference counted. Here we are. And so it's nice to kind of force you into that. I don't often argue pro Rust, okay? I'm arguing pro Rust at this point. It's better than C++. But people who are used to C would rather do those checks as if statements, checking semantic values, as opposed to having a type system in which you still have to do the same if checks. It's not like you're getting out of these if checks, right? You're still doing the same amount of if checks, I believe. The only difference is that you're either doing it via the type system and matches or if statements on properties. You're kind of arguing over the semantics. And so for those that didn't watch this, we're not going to regale this whole thing, but it goes on and on and on and on and on. Like you can see, he's just stuck forever on this slide. So he actually made it the status, the goal, an example of what it currently is, to an example of how Rust would do it, and then never got past that example ever again. Match is greater than if. Sometimes it's hard to say match is greater than if, right? But the inode prime, have you thought about the inodes? No one thinks about the inodes, right? I can't really say that that match is better than if, because match also requires you to have a lot of stuff on the side. There's a lot more. Match enforces default behavior. It does. I'm not saying better. I'm just saying it can be difficult as well. Camel would agree. It's not just an objectively better way. It is a different way, and sometimes it's easier not to use matches. Sometimes it's just nice to have a field in which you can just do something on it. Generally, though, I prefer match over if statements, generally speaking. That's why I tend to like a lot of reactionary people in one room. This is how you get. This is how progress dies. So this is kind of like the precursor to this story. So now that we have that precursor, I wanted to look at this thing right here. Okay, so now that we kind of understand what happened, now shall we read the blog? The real issue is at 2605. Yeah, we can look at 2605. This is where, well, I mean, the real issue started right around 5 minutes and 22 seconds because from there on out, people just started peppering with questions all the way through. And then at 26, oh yeah, I guess we can listen to 2605 as well.
I suspect part of the problem here is you're trying to convince everyone to switch over to the religion as promulgated by Rust. And the reality is that ain't going to happen because we have 50 plus file systems in Linux. They will not all be instantaneously converted over to Rust. Before that happens, we will continue to refactor C code because we want to make the C code better. If it breaks the Rust bindings, at least for the foreseeable future, the Rust bindings are a second-class citizen, and those file systems that depend on the Rust bindings will break, and that is the Rust bindings problem, not the file system community at large problem. And that's going to be true for a long, long time. Okay. And I think we just simply need to accept that, right? Because the answer, you are not allowed to refactor to the C code because it would break 5 critical file systems that distros depend upon, is like not a starter. Answer. Okay? Wait. So like, we'll see. I suspect the best thing to do is you to continue maintaining your Rust bindings. Over time, there will be continued C code refactoring, right? Maybe we will start using, you know, K-free RCU. If that breaks Rust, we will find out whether or not this concept of encoding huge amounts of semantics into the type system is a good thing or a bad thing. And instead of trying to convince us what is actually correct, let's see what happens in a year or two. And it will either work or it won't, and we will see, more likely, where does the pain get allocated? Because with most of these sort of engineering things, it's almost always a pain allocation question.
So Ted, let me try to respond to that. I'm not saying that C is going to be stuck in whatever it has. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is I want for you guys to tell me what the semantics are of these things that will reflect in Rust. That's all I'm saying.
So there's a couple things there. I think in some sense, they just talked past each other. Because the first guy said, we are going to change the interface, and we're not going to adhere to Rust. And then the Rust guy said, I just want to know what types happen. But in some sense, they're also just saying the same thing, which is he's going to make C guy is going to make changes and break Rust. But Rust guy says, just tell me the changes. But this guy says, well, we're going to break you. And he's like, yeah, just tell me the changes. It's like, they're just somehow missing the point where first guy thinks it's about refactoring, second guy is talking about changes being talked. It's actually kind of wild how intense this got over file system changes. One thing that should be taken away here is that devs are incredible at bike shedding. Like, we contain the greatest ability to bike shed more than anybody else. There is no better person on earth. We are better than politicians. We are better than civil engineers. We're bike shedding engineers. I could get a degree in bike shedding engineers. Okay, I could do that. I bike shed a mansion. Okay, we straight up bike shed mansions. What I will say that's really cool, what the C guy said, and I don't think he's getting enough credit for, is that he is saying, I don't know if encoding this much type information into, or this much semantic information into the type system is a better allocation of pain than writing it as if statements in C. Therefore, over the next 2 years, I want to see which one is harder and better. I think there's something very good to that. So if he's honest to what he is saying, and he sees that the Rust people are able to make better and quicker changes based on type changes, and that codifying the semantics into the type system is actually better, then I would say that, and he changes his mind, then he's actually doing a good service. But if he does not change his mind with positive evidence, then I would say that he was just being staunch for no reason. But if the inverse happens, and it's actually harder to maintain Rust, then he made the right call. So it's kind of like this whole, it's this whole like, what's it called? This whole back and forth that I'm actually more curious about. I do think that that's good. What semantics? The Rust guy is saying there is none. Well, no, the Rust guy is saying there is. He just wants to understand them, right? Because when there is something that's returned that is ref counted, that means that is semantics. When something is returned that potentially could be an error, there are semantics. You can take the meaning of those things and encode them into a type in Rust, as opposed to encoding them into runtime behavior that you if check on in, say, something like C. It's the exact same, it's the same problem, just two different views. I'm not sure if the C guy said we're working against you. I think the C guy said it a little bit different. I think the C guy said, we are going to work without regard for you. Does that make sense? I think that's what he said, which is different. That's still bad. I'm not sure if that's bad or not. That's the hard part, is I'm still reconciling whether that is bad or good, meaning that if they're building a system and it's in C, then building it with regard to C is the right way to go. And the C guy, I thought the C guy was being reasonable. He's being okay. He was, again, a little too much ad hominem, right? Saying this religion that is Rust. I think the problem is that people who've been bit by these really deep semantic issues that just plague C, and they just don't want to deal with that, absolutely love Rust, because it just kind of erases so many of these problems. And so they love it. And when you love something that much, it can come across very religion-y. But you could easily see that the C guy has equal religious adherence to C as the Rust people have adherence to Rust. He said we have 50 plus different file systems in C that need to be maintained. We cannot freeze development to make it easier for you to maintain your 4 file systems in Rust. Yeah, and that's also fair. That's what I mean, is he's developing without regard to Rust. In my head, it wasn't, I'm going to develop and actively try to block you. He's just saying, I don't want to consider you when I'm trying to maintain these things. And I think that's valid. He's just being an asshole for no reason. I don't know if he's being an asshole for no reason. I do think that that's deeply unfair. When you're maintaining something that is absolutely huge and something that is truly untested, Rust as a kernel is an untested experiment, okay? No matter what you say, you can be like, oh, well, there was a kernel written in it. It can happen. It's like, yes, I understand. It can happen. But it's still a very untested thing comparatively to C, okay? And so when someone's just, he's seeing it as someone saying you need to change your development style, which was wrong, by the way. It was wrong. The Rust guy was just saying, help me understand the semantics. But he's seeing it as refactor with semantics, semantics that are gearing towards Rust or adhering to an interface. And so I think they're both wrong and they're both right, okay? The C guy has the responsibility of the code that is mission critical everywhere. Yes, the C guy is probably super jaded. To be completely fair, if anybody here has worked in open source, you probably would also be very jaded. I think what he's upset about, which we probably don't have, is there's probably a lot of PRs that are being made. This is my guess, is there's probably a bunch of PRs being made that are to the FS that are getting kind of bike shedded on how it's going to integrate with Rust. That's the charitable view. And so therefore, he's talking about a problem that he's experiencing that's not being stated in the talk. The talk is saying it in a very different way, being like, it's only this way, but maybe his experience is different. That's how I'm guessing it's going down, because it's kind of weird. Because if it's true that all they've ever done is like, oh, hey, tell me about those changes, how I can bring them over, I don't think he would ever be saying those negative things. He doesn't want young kids stepping on his lawn. I'm not sure if that's true. I think you might be reading too heavily into it. But you might be right. To be fair, you might be right. You might just be right. I could be not reading enough into it, or you could be reading too much into it. I don't know which one. That's the hard part about this. Yeah. It seems like he could be speaking of things. That's my guess, is that he got completely jaded of things off of this talk and is kind of bringing in all that frustration into the talk. And it may be completely unfounded. Maybe there's other parts of the system that's being developed with Rust, and they're arguing a bunch, and therefore his experience is a bunch of this arguing, so he's kind of like fighting against it, which is not fair. It's hard when you work in C to incorporate something that you, in your head, is just labeled skill issues. Yeah, that's true too. Very, very true. So I don't know which one's right. All I can tell you is that right now, Rust in Linux is looking like an absolute nightmare. And someone's already quit over this. Many people probably already quit over this, but one of the big guys quit over it. I think accusing people of pushing religion is probably a little bit too strong. It's funny to laugh at. It is very funny to laugh at, to hear somebody that brazen to be like, hey, you're pushing your religion on us. It's funny. But at the end, you got to remember that these people are probably working for free, right? See, again, I just can't take that. I don't like to take this side where I just consider one party a purely bad party and one party a purely holy party. I just somehow my experience with humans up to this date, 37 years, almost 38 years on this beautiful earth, has taught me one thing: that whenever there's a problem, it's almost never a singular person's fault. It's almost always years of maintenance that they didn't want to do, followed into frustrating situations, followed into some weird personal argument that happened off the side, that then someone gives a presentation, and then they're all pissed off about it, right? And then it's just some nonsense that it turns out somebody goes and accidentally brings the person the wrong kind of coffee, and then they end up getting into an hour-long yell, and it has nothing to do with coffee. When's your birthday? Oh, just next week. So what is the appropriate response? In my head, the appropriate response is, hey, I'm the guy that maintains this in C, and I'm going to continue to develop this thing in C, and I'm not going to consider Rust. I think that that's just fine. If you want it, I will make concessions to you and try to describe things to you the best I can. But when I'm making the changes to the file system the way I think it should be done, and the way that we agree upon doing, it's not going to be considered with Rust type system in hand. I think that that's perfectly fine. I don't see how that is a problem, right? Yeah, but dude, this guy getting mobbed by everybody is crazy. So basically what he said, well, it's the other part, saying that he will help derive the semantics to the guy so he doesn't have to discover them, right? Chat, generally speaking, when someone says pushing religion in this context, does that mean blindly following an architecture pattern with no attention to the actual use cases? No, in this case, it'd be a little bit higher level. It's saying that a language will solve all your problems. And I think he's generally arguing that the language won't solve all your problems. Bro got jumped by everyone in the room. Yeah, I mean, by the way, I feel really bad for this guy. I feel really bad for both these guys. Whether or not the BFS stuff and the fighting and all this thing that we're seeing from chat is true or not, this is probably not the right way to go about a presentation. A presentation, you should let the person speak their mind, show what they think so they can clearly articulate every last bit of it, and then afterwards you can have the more exact conversations, because perhaps you're going to miss the entire point. Like, how often have I been reading something, I stop reading and being like, okay, this statement's really terrible, and then everyone's like, the next line, look down one line, and then I read the next line and it's like, and this is because it's very terrible. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. We both agree, right? You should let the presenter finish. It's crazy that they didn't let the presenter finish. All right, now let's look at this. Drew's blogging about Rust again. I promise to be nice. All right, let's hear it go. 2 years ago, seeing the Rust for Linux project starting to get the ball rolling, I wrote, does Rust belong in the Linux kernel? Pending a conclusion consistent with Betteridge's law of headlines. 2 years on, we have a lot of experience to draw on to see how the Rust for Linux is actually playing out. And I'd like to renew my thoughts with some hindsight and more compassion. If you're one of the Rust for Linux participants burned out or burning out on this project, I want to help. Burnout sucks. I've been there. If you haven't been in burnout, it's absolutely one of the worst experiences of all time. It can be extremely demotivating. And the worst part about burnout is taking a vacation does not help. At least me personally, I found taking vacations actually makes the entire problem 10x worse. And so burnout's a very confusing thing. All right. The people working on Rust for Linux are incredibly smart, talented, and passionate developers who have their eyes set on a goal and are tirelessly working towards it. And, as time has shown, with a great deal of patience. Though I've developed a mostly well-earned reputation for being a fierce critic of Rust, I do believe it has its place, and I have a lot of respect for the work these folks are doing. These developers are ambitious and motivated to make an impact, and Linux is undoubtedly the highest impact software in the world. And in theory, Linux is enthusiastically ready to accept motivated innovators into the fold to facilitate that impact. Okay. This is a very positive statement. I'm curious how this is going to round a corner because I feel like it's about to go different here. But I think he's right. I mean, I still think that Rust is a great language for a lot of this. Just remove the possibilities of memory bugs, and that's good. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that argue that you can remove most of the memory bugs with linters and with Valgrind and all this other stuff. Anyways, at least in theory. In practice, the Linux community is the wild, wild west, and sweeping changes are infamously difficult to achieve consensus on, and this is by far the broadest sweeping change ever proposed for the project. Every subsystem is a private fiefdom, subject to the whims of each of the Linux's 1,700 maintainers, almost all of whom have a dog in this race. It's herding cats. Introducing Rust effectively is one part coding work and 99 parts political work, and it's a lot of coding work. Every subsystem has its own unique culture and its own strongly held beliefs and values. Hey, this is a very honest take, by the way. This is a really great take. Dude, just being completely straight on exactly what it is, which is just, it's all fiefdoms, and you're going to have to win fiefdom by fiefdom. Like, that's effectively what appears to be an untenable problem. Yeah, you're effectively trying to make a global government. Like, that's effectively going to be impossible. What is a fiefdom? A fief has effectively like a local lord. They're still like a larger overall item. So you can just think of like the Middle Ages, right? What's a fief? What's fiefdom? A fief. Just think the Middle Ages where there's local lords and a global lord, right? Thanks. A fief is an estate of land, especially one held on condition of feudal services. This is really not helping me. This is really, really not helping me. So a thing of land. So often in the Dark Ages and all that, there'd be large swaths of land given to various lords, and those various lords would then effectively own all the people on it, and all the people would work for the lords, and those lords would all pay tributes to the actual overarching government. All right, there you go. Is that good enough for you guys? Yeah. You work, I protect. And by protect, I mean I use you to protect. Can't have feudalism without feuds. Yeah. There you go. So you can imagine that each one of these things, like FS is its own fiefdom. It's its own group of people all working on it, and there's somebody at the head who pays tribute, if you will, to Linus and the overall Linux thing, but they are still their own little... own the people is kind of misleading. But they were serfs. Yeah, they were serfs. Which is, it's hard to say you weren't owned, right? You could be called to war even in your 40s, right? Like, it was not a beautiful system. I think we can all agree that it was not a great system, like the United States. I mean, the draft does exist. The draft exists in every single country. Any country that actually goes to real war will have a draft. So it's crazy to say, oh, you should have a country with no draft. Like, that's just not going to happen. But it's a little different. Okay? It's just a little different. We can all agree that the United States is nothing like the feudal system. It's a little different. Now, one could argue that the feudal system has made a resurgence with various companies, large companies that own large swaths of the industry. You could argue is almost kind of creating these fiefdoms, right? One could argue that, but it's a little different. Do countries with mandatory service have drafts? My guess is yes. Techno-feudalism, yeah. The consequences of these factors is that Rust for Linux has become a burnout machine. Not surprising at all. I always found, especially when I was working on Falcor, the coding part was not the part that was painful. The coding part was the great part. The political part, which was larger part of my job, was more difficult than anything else. My heart goes out to the developers who have been burned in this project. It's not fair. Free software is about putting in the work. It's a classical duocracy until it isn't, and people get hurt. In spite of my critiques of the project, I recognize the talent and humanity of everyone involved and wouldn't have wished these outcomes on them. I have also sympathy for many of the established Linux developers who didn't exactly want this on their plate, but that's neither here nor there for the purpose of this post. And any of those developers and their fiefdoms who went out of their way to make life difficult for Rust developers above and beyond what was needed to ensure technical excellence are accountable for these shitty outcomes. That's fair. I'm curious what the because obviously there's a source here. Yeah, I saw the video, and yes, I expect much better from you in the future, Ted. That was some hostile, toxic bullshit. Dang, that's cool. Called the guy out. Just came right out. By the way, this is great. By the way, this is one thing I've come to really appreciate about the Linux area, is that it seems like people get specifically called out as opposed to these generalized statements. Like, remember when the Rust Foundation had that problem where Shepard's Oasis got kicked off from the keynote, and then he quit, and then there's all this drama around it. And then at some point, way later, you heard like these people came forward and said, hey, it was kind of like my fault, but it wasn't really my fault, all this kind of stuff. Instead, Linux is just like, yo, Ted, I saw what you did, and I did not like it. I think that's pretty great. I think this is generally a better way to operate. Yeah, hey, fuck you specifically. Not everybody, but specifically. Yeah, the guy from 2006. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think 26 guy was he was obviously way too intense, went into ad hominem. I still think it would be much better to just try to get him to be more specific and to provide the semantics, but still, he can still code as if C is the only thing, but provide the semantics, at least throw a bone to Rust, and allow them to develop in their own world. I think that's completely fair. Right? You don't have to be intentionally difficult. You don't have to say, I can't provide you semantics, because, like, dog, you have the semantics. Just provide them. So where do we go now? Well, let me begin by reiterating something from my last article on the subject. I wish Rust for Linux the best luck and hope to see them succeed. Their path is theirs to choose, and though I might advise a moment to rest before diving headfirst into this political maelstrom, once again, I support you in your endeavors if this is what you choose to do. Not my business. That said, allow me to humbly propose a different path for your consideration. Okay, interesting. Interesting. Here's the pitch. A motivated group of talented Rust OS developers could build a Linux-compatible kernel from scratch very quickly with no need to engage in LKML politics. That's the Linux kernel. What is LKML? I don't know what it is. Fork it? Well, it's effectively forking, yes. But hold on. Hear him out. The Linux kernel mailing list. Okay. Hey, hear him out. Hear him out. You would be astonished how quickly you can make meaningful gains in this kind of environment. I think if the amount of effort being put into Rust for Linux were applied to a new Linux-compatible OS, we could have something production-ready for some use cases within a few years. That's a hard sell, though. I don't think he might. I actually think he might not be wrong. So, one, you get to build the semantics in, because Rust obviously operates in a way in which is different than C. You don't have to fight against C-isms doing it in Rust. So you get to build it the way you need to build it to make it accessible for you. B, you don't have any of the legacy and the arguing. You theoretically should be able to move faster. What I'm very genuinely curious about is, can Rust developers come together to do that? Or will they end up arguing about types? I'm being real here. The problem about having a highly semantic type system is that you also have the ability to argue entirely too much. Right? Anyways, I'm just throwing it out there. It's true. I've been there. I argue with myself really hard, even when I'm doing it. Too much inner monologue. You become the inner monologue, right? But the thing that's really hard is, who's going to sponsor this work? You need a group of talented engineers that can dedicate more than full-time effort to a singular project for multiple years. Like, that's really hard. Years. Few, in my head, means 3 to 5. That's a hard ask. Well, someone said streamers. The worst part about this stuff is that no one's going to watch that stream. Okay, let's just pretend all the smartest Rust developers who are going to build an operating system want to okay, we'll fund it with the crowd and we'll stream it. It'll be all open source and open viewable. It would go almost to zero right away because people are like, I can't understand what the hell's that. They've been talking about this one lifetime for the last 3 hours. Yeah, I would, but most wouldn't. Yeah, but even you would fall off. The thing is there just comes a point where you might as well be programming it. You'd have to have that intensive knowledge. Novel OS design is hard. Projects like Redux are working on this, but it will take a long time, or it will take a long, I think that's not supposed to be a long as in one word. It will take a long time to bear fruit, and research operating systems often have to go back to the drawing board and make major revisions over and over again before something useful and robust emerges. This is a Rust downfall, which is due to the amount of encoded nature or the semantics encoded into the type system. When you have to start refactoring, you do have to do, I personally found I have to do larger refactors. This is important work and near to my heart, but it's not for everyone. However, making an OS which is based on proven design like Linux is much easier and can be done very quickly. I work on my own novel OS design for a couple years, and it's still stuck in design hell and badly in need of being rethought. On the other hand, I wrote a passable Unix clone alone in less than 30 days. Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, it's good honesty. A man who writes operating systems says he has his own operating system, and it's really hard to do. It's great advice. It just goes to show how much more effort is probably, even from experts, how hard it is to do it right. Yeah, I've never dug into a file system. Rust is a great fit for a large monolithic kernel design like Linux. Imagine having the opportunity to implement something like the Dcache from scratch in Rust without engaging with the politics. That's something a small group of people, perhaps as few as one, could make substantial inroads on in a short period of time, taking full advantage of what Rust has to offer. Working towards compatibility with an existing design can leverage a much larger talent pool than the very difficult problem of novel OS design. A lot of people can manage with a copy of the ISA manual and a missive to implement a single syscall in a Linux-compatible fashion over a weekend. A small and motivated group of contributors could take on the work of, say, building out IO Uring compatibility and start finding wins fast. It's a lot easier than designing IO Uring from scratch. I might even jump in and build out a driver or two for fun myself. That sounds like a good opportunity for me to learn Rust properly with a fun project with a well-defined scope. This is a very, 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 I must say he actually sounds really positive guy. My basic understanding of Drew right now is that he is very positive person. And I think something that's kind of interesting is if you say build this stuff and you build it really, really well and the design's really, really good, it might be easier for Linux to implement or bring in wholesale than it is to simply fight the political system slowly. Non-bike shedder. This is a non-bike shedder moment right now. It's really cool. They just want a free labor for Rust implementation into the kernel TLDR. They should do it themselves and offer it up. Well, I'm not sure if they want free labor. I think what they want is that if you're going to slowly, this is like the classic problem of integrating two languages that have vastly different views. This is why Zig theoretically is easier, because Zig doesn't have a different view than C. Zig has the same view as C, so you could easily just start slotting things in. Whereas with Rust, it has such a very different view, including that you even have to change, the ABI and everything just for it to be able to communicate. You then need to be able to start convincing the people on the other side to implement in such a way that makes it easy to do it in Rust. And so it's hard. All right. It's genuinely, it's a very hard political problem. All right. This is why I love Rust. This is why I love Zig. Yeah, Zig is very interesting. Right. Does Rust have a stable ABI yet? I don't know. One would assume it does. Attracting labor shouldn't be too difficult with this project in mind either. Does C have a stable ABI? From all the things I've read, if there was the Rust OS project with a well-defined scope and design, aiming for Linux ABI compatibility, I'm sure there's a lot of people who jump in to stake a claim on some piece of the puzzle and put it together. And the folks working on Rust for Linux have the benefit of a great deal of experience with the Linux kernel to apply the oversight on the broader design approach. Having a clear, well-proven goal in mind can also help to attract the same people who want to make an impact in a way that speculative research project might not. Freeing yourself of the Linux kernel mailing list political battles would probably be a big win for the ambitions of bringing Rust into the kernel space. Such an effort would also be a great way to mentor a new generation of kernel hackers who are comfortable with Rust in kernel space and ready to deploy their skill set to the research projects that would build the next generation OS like Redux. The labor pool of serious OS developers badly needs a project like this to make it happen. I'm actually surprised at how nice this blog post is. This blog post, I mean, I think one could read this blog post like, hey, Rust developers, screw off. Go build it yourself, and maybe we'll consider it. But I think the other way you could read this is that the beast as it is extremely hard to change. So maybe you should do it differently. Maybe you should try an entirely different approach that might be more successful at even being successful bringing it into the Linux core. Because you could imagine if they were perfectly ABI compliant, and this is what people wanted was a safer version, one could argue you could bring it in at some point, potentially. Power to the people, Rust people. Rust guys are cloud chasing. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's the case. So my suggestion for the Rust for Linux project is you're burned out and that's awful. I feel for you. It might be fun and rewarding to spend your recovery busting out a small prototype Unix kernel and start fleshing out bits and pieces of the Linux ABI with your friends. I can tell you from my own experience doing something very much like this that it was a very rewarding burnout recovery project for me. And who knows where it could go. By the way, this is such great advice on burnout. Oh my goodness, it is such a good advice because right now so many people being burnt out on the political side. So just do it without the politics, without those politics, and you just might find yourself having a bunch of fun and reinvigorate yourself again. And the reinvigorating would probably allow you to re-engage in the politics again. Once again, wishing you the best and hoping for your success wherever the path leads. Okay, I feel like we've been caught up on the stuff. And I think my only takeaway is that I just genuinely feel bad. I just genuinely feel bad because most of the world relies on Linux. Most of the world needs it to operate. And it just looks like a cluster festival of fiefdoms. Hacker News, Linux kernel, Apple stuff is the reason why I'm starting to hate tech. I wish I was never exposed to these. Well, But Linux does operate. Kernel contributors are not the only ones that are resistant to Rust. We are thousands of devs that are working on embedded projects and do small kernel changes that have been using C for decades. Yeah, I mean, I think you're perfectly correct. I think you hit the nail on the head, which is, that's why I didn't like to blindly just blame these people, right? I just felt like it was kind of unfair. Because I don't think it's fair to just simply blame one group of people for it all. I think there's much more momentum than you realize. Yeah, if somebody wants to link this, I'd be glad to read it. Sometimes I don't want to program or learn anything, even of my own motivation. I want to just go do something completely different for a couple days. Yeah, and I think that's fair. Did I already read this? I'm not sure if... yeah, okay, I already read this. This is the graphic drivers one. But for completeness, I will read this because we already read this on Friday, but we'll read this, okay? I regretfully completely understand Wetson's frustration. By the way, Wetson is the one that quit. We already read this thing. He just quit. He just said, hey, I can't keep doing this. I need to just simply back away. The end. A subset of C kernel developers just seem determined to make the lives of Rust maintainers as difficult as possible. They don't see Rust as having a value and would rather it just goes away. Here's an inverse question I'd like to ask. How many Rust developers look at C and would just rather have it go away? Are the Rust developers providing them the same level of desire to include them as much as they are the other way around? And maybe this is why there's as much tension as there is perhaps the golf is great and they're fighting against each other, right? Because what I see is that it's kind of like a two-way toxic street. Like, as I read more of this, I feel worse for the C developers and I feel worse for the Rust developers. I somehow feel like I don't even understand which side is right, or potentially they're both wrong, right? It just feels wild. When I tried to upstream the DRM abstractions last year, that was all blocked on basic support for the concept of a device in Rust. Even just a stub wrapper for a struct device would be enough. That simple concept only recently finally got merged over 1 year later. When I wrote the DRM scheduler abstraction, I ran into many memory safety issues caused by bad design of the underlying C code. The lifetime requirements were undocumented and boiled down to design your own driver like AMD GPU and make it work or else. My driver is not like AMD GPU. It fundamentally can't work the same way. When I tried to upstream minor fixes to the C code to make the behavior more robust and the lifetime requirements sensible, the maintainer blocked it and said I should just do what other drivers do. Even when I pointed out that C drivers also trigger the same bugs because the API is just bad and unintuitive, there are many secret hidden lifetime requirements, he wouldn't budge. One C driver works, so Rust drivers must work the same way. So I think this actually lends even more credence to the previous article we just read, right? Which is, don't write it fighting against C. Write it with just Rust in mind. Like perhaps that is truly perhaps that is truly the best way. And I think one thing that I may be missing in here that I probably don't understand is, was the C developer that blocked this? Because it sounds like what I see here is that this person made some really more robust changes, like just reading it just word for, on face value, made robust changes to whatever this DRM scheduler is, and made it better. But by doing so, must have broke some level of backwards compatibility, because it's saying, hey, all drivers work this way. But then you're like, well, actually, we can make it work different ways. But that must have put some sort of onus on the drivers that already existed. So therefore, it wasn't, right? I assume that's how I kind of understood this exchange. Or at least that's me reading into it. We have a similar discussion in a few years when everything needs to be Zig. There very well could be. I think Zig has a much smaller road to fight against, though. I think Zig just has, because Zig and C are like, they're kind of like brothers, right? Zig is kind of like the little brother that grew up around C, acts like C for the most part, but then it was just like, man, my brother kept falling down the stairs, so I just put up a rail, right? Yeah, we're missing a lot of context. Yeah. I really wish Mastodon didn't do this. Just show me the replies. Yeah. Making the Rust binding safe would require duplicating much of the functionality of the C code just to track things to uphold the lifetime requirements. It made no sense. It would have been just easier to write the whole thing in Rust. This is, again, that's why this cell is so hard, right? I agree that it sounds like it's shitty either way. Either way you're going, this sounds shitty. To this day, bugs in DRM scheduler have been the only cause of kernel panics triggered via my Apple GPU driver in production. The design of the component is just bad. But because I come from the Rust world, the maintainer didn't want to listen to my suggestions. To be fair, perhaps you could have said the design of the component didn't take into consideration certain aspects that cause kernel panics. I mean, I think I could also have a problem with this. If someone said what you did was bad, here's how you do it right. You could obviously see that personal dynamics could happen. This is after the fact. I know, but this mentality has to come into it. I assume this mentality has to come into it, right? Because there first were kernel panics that were caused by this thing. Then there was the rewriting of the thing saying, hey, this was bad. And then saying, hey, I made these things better, right? It just feels like that, I'm not saying it's good. If this was better written, then you should take it. If it's better written, you should set your ego aside. But I think a lot of people have a difficult time setting ego aside. If it takes a whole year to get the concept as simple as a trivial device wrapper upstreamed, not any device model functionality, literally just an object wrapping the struct so we can pass it around, then how is Rust for Linux ever going to take off? Rust works. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person to ever to single-handedly write a complex GPU kernel driver that has never had a memory safety kernel panic bug itself in production, running on thousands of users' systems for 1.5 years now. But because I wrote it in Rust. But I get the feeling that some Linux kernel maintainers just don't care about future code quality or the stability or security anymore. They just want to keep their C code and wish us Rust folks would go away. And that's really sad. This isn't helping making kernel better. The problem here is that C devs have been unaware of language developments of the last decade. Almost no one in the C community understands the very real issues that come from things like pointer. I can't even say that word. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if C devs are ignorant. Again, provenance. I'm not sure what pointer provenance means. I don't know if C devs are ostriches that stick their head in the sand. So I can't make these claims because I don't like they cannot be. There you go. The answer in one small thing right here. C was a shit lang when it came out, even worse 50 years later. You need to go read some history, my friend. I feel like you are kind of missing the context in which C was created. There would be no Unix without C. I feel like that's a troll true. It's probably just a troll. Worse is better, though. I've read Worse is better. Worse is better is great. Worse, I actually feel like rereading Worse is better. Right? Okay. What a bad take. Yeah. No C++ without C. Well, I mean, no one said C++ is great, okay? No one in here is accusing C++ of being a good language. Can we all just agree we're all talking about C and Rust? None of us are going on that end. Okay? None of us are making such claims right now. Okay? No D without C. You're right. Hey, unique pointer is a good concept. Unique pointer fixes a whole bunch of memory safety stuff. Like at Netflix, we started doing a lot of things with unique pointers just to help prevent a whole slew of issues that were creeping up. Unique pointer and shared pointers are, in a sense, nice. I don't want to. I worked at Netflix. Yeah, not we anymore. They did that. Smart pointers are good in general. Smart pointers are good. I don't have any problems with that. Right. I prefer just 1+ on C. Nice. And I believe that's called MIT. And MIT. Get tweeted on. Tweeted. Anyways, by the way, I'm under no suspicion that C, for me, is a language I want to use all the time. I've enjoyed using Zig quite a bit, but let's be real. I love using Go. You know why? It's easy. You know, I just make an interface. I just make a function take in an interface, and I can just slap any old object in there. I don't have to think about, oh gosh, I got to create a V table to do searching up of, right? Like I don't have to do all that. I just throw it in there, right? You know what I mean? It's great. I'm not saying Go is perfect. By any means do I think Go is perfect. No, map being nil is just, I'm so frustrated by that. I'm just so frustrated by that. Because it's like you already have a language that's garbage collected. What are you doing? You're trying to make some weird optimization so you don't have to initialize a map right away? I just hate that. It's just so stupid. And there's a couple other stupid things. But that's just me. The name? I think I just heard a Discord notification when I said the name. I'm pretty sure this isn't muted. Please don't text me. There we go. Muted. Bam. Got it. The name is I forgot to mute Discord. I let my alerts on for two videos in a row, and I can't seem to get my shit together, okay? I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. A Jen.